Okay, look, I've had this channel for over 12 years. I think I'm allowed to revisit some topics that I've covered before. Hey there, folks. Yeah, a little bit of a retread, sort of. I first addressed the issue of casting of trans characters in film and television way back in 2018, where the channel looked like this. Some things look the same, some things not so much. But I largely stand by that video. So this isn't really like I need to update it because my take was wrong. Honestly, in if anything, I've kind of come down a bit harder on the issue, but I'll get to that. But the thing is, regardless of however I feel about how well I did or didn't tackle the issue previously, something came up. The second season of Squid Game came out at the very tail end of 2023, featuring a trans character. A trans character played by a cis actor. And much to my frustration, I saw way more defenses of this than I really felt I should still be seeing. So I wanted to dig into this a little bit. I don't want to harp too much on Squid Game in specific. I'm taking this in many ways as a renewal of vows, almost reiterating the problems that have always been the case with this kind of casting and reminding you they still exist. Although one of the things I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised to discover was that I went and did a check, because the thing is, there's only so many of these things that come on my radar in terms of trans characters and stuff, because I've mentioned this casually before. By and large, the place where trans and non-binary characters are most commonly coming up is in stuff I just don't have any interest in. You know, it's a lot of dramas. It's a lot of streaming shows that I'm not interested in. Like I like fantasy and action and sci-fi, and that wasn't where the casting was coming up, and so I wasn't really paying attention to it. But I wanted to look into what the current state of things were, even as Squid Game kind of brought the conversation back up again. And I was really pleasantly surprised to find out that by and large, the issue of casting cis people in trans roles is pretty much behind us. Not 100%, but when I narrowed my look at stuff that had come out from 2019 onward, in other words, after I made that video, not that I'm trying to claim credit, I'm just saying using that as a demarcation point, there was a lot that was what I would hope. In fact, the vast majority was, especially when it came to American productions. I looked into, now I couldn't find comprehensive lists, but lists that I could find of trans characters, I was finding in television, in film, large-scale productions, and small ones, that trans and non-binary people were being cast in trans and non-binary roles. It wasn't 100%. There were a couple of exceptions that I found, but they were largely either stuff done in other countries. Not that that automatically gives you a pass. I'll kind of circle back onto that too. But I am also going to come down way harder on Hollywood than I am on anybody else, because, well, they definitely should know better by now. And also they're setting the template that others are emulating. So, But like the few examples I could see where cis people were still being cast in trans roles, couple were from non-English speaking countries, and like one or two instances were like on TV shows where the casting actually happened pre 2018, but the character has still been around and like been recurring since then. I'm like, okay. So that was a real pleasant surprise, and as a result, I'm actually going to be way less angry in this video than I thought I was going to be. I thought I was going to have to come in here screaming, why is this still a thing? But to my very pleasant surprise, it largely isn't. Casting cis people as trans characters is, for the most part, a thing of the past right now. That having been said, I mentioned earlier, it still really frustrated me that when it did happen in a high-profile production, I saw a bunch of people and pieces ignoring it, defending it, or just reporting broadly people upset without really properly diving into the issue. So I am going to zero in, as I said, on Squid Game, partially because it is kind of the only high-profile example right now. But I don't want to beat up that show specifically because of it, partially because I have seen the second season of Squid Game. My review is actually up in my secondary channel, The Break Room of Geeks. But the trans character in that is very good. She is a well-written character. She manages to avoid some of the more troublesome tropes and stereotypes that we can get with trans representation. And the few times that it kind of dips into things that maybe aren't my idea, like there is a pretty heavy focus on trans pain and how hard it is and how isolating it is. But the thing is, while I have expressed previously that I'm kind of sick of that being the primary narrative used with trans people, I will absolutely give some leeway when it's done either exceptionally well or when it is absolutely appropriate to address that. And Squid Game, if you don't know the premise, it's dealing with a bunch of people playing deadly games, and they're there because they are financially desperate. So yeah, it makes sense in that case to have a focus on the pain and the isolation and how she needs money to get out of this society that is not treating her well. And she has that kind of desperation for that. It is valid in this setting, especially considering it's not her story exclusively. If she was there bringing trans and queer joy in the middle of a setting where every other character is at best mercenarily optimistic and at worst absolutely miserable, yeah, no, that wouldn't have fit at all. So writing is really good. She's very well written, and the actor does a very good job in the part, brings a lot of empathy and pathos, and just does wonderfully with it. So I'm not here to criticize the writing, and I'm not here to criticize the performance, both of which are good. I am still going to criticize the casting, though, regardless of how good the performance was. Because there has been, and remains an inherent harm that is caused when you cast a cisgender actor to play a trans role. And I'm going to zero in on some of the specifics as to why in a minute, but I don't think that the creator behind Squid Game, because it has the same writer and director coming back to do it as the first season, I think he meant very well. And I again, he's not from Hollywood, so I'm not going to hold his feet to the fire the way I would a Hollywood production for doing this, partly because I think he did recognize that a trans actor would have been better. We'll get into what he said about it in a minute. I think he recognizes that that would have been better, but I also think that this is a case where, given the differences in just culture in Korea and South Korea where this was made, I don't think he understands the damage that this casting does innately. And I am a little bit frustrated that given this was an international production that nobody thought to tell him. Like, I understand it is a Korean product, but like, unlike the first season, which was made for that audience and then blew up worldwide, they knew this was going to be massive worldwide. And if you're going to represent a marginalized group that is marginalized the world over, maybe do a little checking on that. But honestly, that's something I'd almost hold producers more responsible for than him specifically. But in any case, his main thing that he brought up was a lack of transgender, well, specifically out transgender actresses in Korea. And if this were an American or honestly even a European production, I would call BS right there. Because no, there's plenty, you just opted not to look. But this isn't a case like back when Scarlett Johansson was going to play a trans man where they wanted a big name and there weren't that many, or really any at the time, big name trans actors because, you weren't casting them. But this isn't that. And as I said, I'm not going to call BS on that specifically. I'm going to raise an eyebrow slightly, but I'm not going to call BS because, again, I don't know South Korea. I have done a little looking into it, and I will acknowledge that, like, out trans people at all has only kind of been a thing over there for the last few decades. It is not something that has had as much time to mature as in Europe or in America. So I will grant some leeway here. I am still going to raise an eyebrow, as I said, because if you're saying you can't find anybody, and I spent 5 minutes on Google and found 3 out South Korean trans actresses, that makes me question it a little bit. Here's what I'll grant on that. There is possibly a translation issue here because obviously this was translated into English, what I was reading, but he might have been more reflecting on the fact that there was a very small pool of actors because, like, it's not like everyone can just cast the exact same person to fill some. You need a pool of talent to pull from because you might need somebody who can match certain aspects beyond just being trans or can perform certain things, or there's a certain physicality to the character, certainly that maybe not other performers, if they were even willing to play the part, would have been able to do. So I will grant he probably had an incredibly small potential pool of actors, and that probably made it very difficult. I'm going to grant that. So I'm not even going to get on his case overly for the fact that he cast a cisgender person to play this trans character. I am, however, going to go off a bit on casting a cisgender man to play a transgender woman. And again, this has nothing to do with the performance. He did a really good job, but he should not have been in that part. Now, I thought I was going to have to reiterate a whole bunch of things that I had said in the previous video about all these excuses that I hear given as to, oh, but we should cast cisgender because I'm not even going to address those because obviously they're invalid because we've been having trans characters for the last 4 years and we haven't been doing that by and large. So I feel like I can move past that and ignore it. And I feel like anyone who's going to try and argue the things with me that used to be argued at me back in 2018, things about, oh, but won't they feel dysphoria? Oh, but what if we have to show them being cisgender pre-transition? Oh, but this and that. Like, I feel like I can ignore all those because if those arguments were valid, we would still be seeing cisgender actors cast as transgender characters for the years since. And as I said, it's mostly died off. So I'm ignoring all of those defenses of this. I thought I was going to have to reiterate them. I really don't think I need to. That having been said, there is a reason to cast a cis man as a trans woman that is pretty much never owned up to, nor cited as a specific reason even by the defenders of the practice, because I think everybody understands how it sounds. And I'm not necessarily accusing Squid Game specifically of doing this, but let's be honest about the fact that in a lot of cases, a reason to cast a cisgender man as a transgender woman is because you want it to be immediately clear to the audience that this is a trans woman. You want them to look clockable. You want them to immediately clock as that was someone who was born a man. And to be clear, having representation of trans women who don't 100% pass is not only fine, it should happen. Like, passing and looking as if you were born as the gender you transitioned into is, to some degree, a point of privilege in one of two ways. Either because you had yourself figured out early enough that you were able to start transition at a younger age, or if you transition later in life, you have the means to spend limitless amounts of money on whatever procedures and fine-tuning that you need to feel comfortable in your skin. That is where you get the vast majority of very passable trans women, people who transition young and people who transition rich. So it is fully valid to have a trans person that is visible as a trans person. But the thing is, again, you don't have to cast a man to do that. Again, not specific to Squid Game, but broadly speaking, because I am trying to keep as much of this as the broad conversation as I can. Broadly speaking, there are plenty of trans women or trans feminine actors and actresses who you can tell and would happily play the part, but they're still actually that thing. I don't pass. I mean, granted, I'm not a trans woman. I'm trans feminine, but I'm not a trans woman. Just reminder to anyone who's like, you'll never be a woman. It's like, never said I was. But anyways, there are certainly people out there that you can cast like that. And you should be casting people who it is visibly clear that they are trans, because that's validating as representation, because not every trans person, in fact, most trans people are not going to look like the most convincing transitioned person ever to hit screen. The desire in and of itself, or the intent in and of itself, to have someone visually clock as masculine, for lack of a better way to put it, is not innately harmful in and of itself, but it is still harmful to cast a cis man in order to achieve that end. Because as I said, you can achieve that end through casting a trans actor or actress who still can be clocked to some degree. Or, here's a crazy thought. Back, earlier in the 2010s, when we were getting a lot more of this kind of thing, you were using all kinds of makeup and prosthetics to make cis people look trans. Just do it in the other direction. And some things have done that. Amelia Perez actually did that. Quick note on that. Actually casting transgender people in transgender roles does not automatically mean that the trans representation you cast them to be in is actually good. There might be kind of a spiritual second half to this when I get around to watching that movie. I know enough about it to know I'm probably going to be upset, but yeah, regardless. Okay, moving on. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole quite yet. There is not necessarily a problem with having a clockable person play a trans woman. In fact, if you ever have followed Mia Moore on, I don't know if she's still on Twitter. She would do this on Twitter at any rate. One of her favorite things to do was to find pictures of women, often very famous women, who looked a little bit like she did and had some pretty strong features, and put it up on Twitter claiming it was her, and watch as the transphobes all came in claiming to clock her and say it was so obvious that she was a man. She did it with figures like Sigourney Weaver, Gina Davis. She did it with J.K. Rowling once, which was the funniest thing ever. But the point is, you can actually even get a cisgender woman who can be somewhat more masculine in the features, a squarer jaw, a little bit taller. Heck, there was a woman in this. I don't remember the character's name. I'm bad with characters' names even before we bring non-English languages into it. But the one with the lip ring, she was taller than most of the guys she was next to and actually had a slightly masculine face. You could have cast somebody like her. They evidently exist. And I know that it's not impossible in Korea to cast a cisgender woman to play a trans woman, because there was a show over there that did in fact do that. So if I give the grace that Squid Game did not have the pool of out transgender actresses to pull from for this character, okay, you still should have cast a cis woman and not a cis man. So now we need to get into why I, for one, am drawing a hard line on this issue. It is not okay, and it is innately harmful to cast a cisgender man to play a transgender woman. I will not be accepting any excuses for doing it from anyone anymore. The most I will ever grant is, given some cultures that I just don't know enough about and have no business judging, like South Korea, okay, maybe you can't get a trans actress. You could have still gotten a cisgender woman, and you should have. I've had conversations with other people, other trans people, who agree with my general point, but aren't prepared to draw a hard line and say it's never okay. I'm drawing a hard line. I'm drawing a hard line that if you are depicting what is intended to be a transgender woman who is in any way out, be it to herself or the world at large, am I sort of making an exception for I Saw the TV Glow? No. The entire point of that story was she never came out. So, yeah, I'll make an exception for that, but I don't even think that's actually an exception. If this is an out transgender person who is living in any way, be it in private or in public, as a trans woman, you cannot cast a cis man. I am hardlining this. I will not accept exceptions for this anymore. Here is why. When you cast a man to play a trans woman. You innately and inherently reinforce the idea that trans women are really just men who are pretending. And that will happen regardless of the script, of the acting, of the framing of the camera, of anything. You enable and enforce that notion by casting that way, simply because a man pretending to be a woman is what people are watching on the screen. No matter what the narrative says, no matter how the characters behave, that's what they're watching. That is what you are showing them a trans woman is. A cis man who is pretending. Years ago, Lindsay Ellis did a really fantastic series using the Transformers movies to examine different ways of looking at and analyzing films. And when she did one specifically about the character of Michaela Baines, who was played by Megan Fox, she kind of made the most succinct version of the point that I'm going to reemphasize and then leap off from. She noted there that in the script, Michaela is competent, has an arc, has a lot of technical prowess. She's really the only person who knows anything about cars in the entire story. But no matter how it was written and no matter how Megan Fox played it, the camera was leering, lingering, and depicted the character as something to be ogled, not a person to be taken seriously. Or, as she put it in the conclusion of that video,
framing and aesthetics supersede the rest of the text. Always, always, always.
So, if you want a full breakdown on how the framing and presentation of something overrides whatever intent or writing or acting there was, if it goes in the opposite direction, you can watch that full video. But I want to now take it a step further and talk about how casting can supersede intended meaning as well. There is such a thing as meta-framing. When you cast a certain person, that can, it does not always, but it can cause a certain reaction from the audience that has nothing to do with the script and nothing to do with the performance, but just has to do with the person who you cast in it. This is why oftentimes in big budget movies, especially franchises, you will get surprisingly small parts played by surprisingly notable actors. For some reason, the go-to example that's coming to my head are the agency directors in various Mission Impossible films. We've had Anthony Hopkins, we've had Lawrence Fishburne. These people are barely in the movie, but that casting has an impact because you know that person. And by casting someone that recognizable in a part that small, that is using casting and metaframing as a way to tell the audience this person is important no matter how much or how little they appear in the film itself. So that is a way of leaning in to what the casting will mean to the audience. There are other times that it can absolutely work against you. Kind of the classic example of that is when you have comedic actors or what are generally considered to be more frivolous kind of actors, be it comedy or action or what have you, trying to move into more serious drama. And sometimes you get something where that framing works in its favor, and other times the whole thing just feels off because you're going, that doesn't work because I know the other stuff that you do. And given what I know you from, that's hurting this. So casting has an impact on the audience 100% separate from the writing, the acting, even the directing. Separate from all that, who you cast still says something. That can even come down to casting an unknown actor as something. When Christopher Reeve was cast as Superman, he was basically not known for anything. And what that casting meant was that as far as audiences were concerned, that's Superman. That's not this actor who I'm familiar with being Superman, but that's Superman. And that's kind of been favored since then with often up and coming or somewhat unknown or at least lesser known actors being cast in that part, because the intention is for the part to be bigger than the actor. So it can work in all manner of dimensions. And the meta-casting reality of putting a man in a film or television series to play a trans woman is that no matter what you write, no matter how they perform it, no matter how you film it, that casting still sends the message, this is a man who is pretending. And that message has always been harmful. But at this point in time, with the current state of trans rights where they are and the massive attacks that are happening on our very existence in this country and around the goddamn world, that is not an okay thing to reinforce. It is harmful to reinforce that notion in any way. And especially when I know you didn't mean to. And again, I don't want to overemphasize this specifically in terms of Squid Game. I suspect that he meant well. I suspect he did not understand probably the global situation for trans people. I don't think he meant to cause harm. But casting this way does. And it's why even when it is in something that is good and is a piece of representation that is good representation, we still need to call it out. Because in any way, reinforcing that idea that a trans woman is really a man, and also, like, to be clear, reinforcing the idea that a trans man is really a woman, also not okay. But let's be honest, trans women are the ones more actively being legislated against by and large right now if we're talking about the trans community. The ones being cited, the ones who are being called threats and groomers are mostly trans feminine people. But yeah, it's not okay to do it the other way either. So if you can't get a trans actor for whatever reason, at the very least, what has to be done, not what should be, at this point, what has to happen is that you cast a cisgender actor who is the gender that the character transitioned into, not out of. So if you're going to cast a cisgender performer to play a trans woman, cast a cisgender woman. If you're going to cast a cisgender actor to play a trans man, cast a cisgender man. Don't cast cisgender women to play trans men. Don't cast cisgender men to play transgender women. That casting innately undermines our standing and what people understand and believe us to be. Because yes, there are some people who will always look at someone like me and go, you're a man. But there are other people who are doing their best to try and understand, whose main conduit to trans people is whatever representation is put out into the world. And when they see representation of us that to them says, this is a man pretending, that is harmful. Because it's not. Trans women aren't men. And trans men aren't women. Now, I know there are going to be some people who are going to hear that and just negate that notion. But if you are at least understanding that trans women are women and trans men are men and non-binary people are non-binary, then I hope you will understand why I'm saying this cannot happen anymore. And while I appreciate that it happens way more rarely now, I am frustrated to hell and back by how many people I saw defend this. It shouldn't be happening anymore, but on the few occasions when it does, don't defend it. Don't give it a pass. And no, you don't have to condemn the whole thing. I'm not going to tell you not to watch Squid Game 2. I watched it. It's fine. It's nowhere near as good as the first season, but it's fine. You can watch it. It's okay. As I said, the performance is good. But the casting is harmful. And there, for me at least, is nothing that you can do that will negate that initial harm. That casting is innately harmful. And no matter what you do after that, you cannot overcome that base level of harm. So don't. And when it does happen, which again, I'm happy to say is increasingly rarely, don't defend it. Again, I'll make some allowances. I understand for cultural differences. I understand he couldn't get a trans actress. Cast a woman. Cast a cisgender woman. He absolutely could have done that. So, there we are. I know I got a little heated. Trust me, I thought I was going to get a lot angrier than I ended up getting. But, yeah. things are headed in a good direction with all this. But when we have bumps, don't defend that. With all that having been said, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you letting me get this off my chest. And whatever your thoughts are, provided they're not attacks on me or attacks on the creator of Squid Game. As I said, I think he meant well. Don't harass people. Jesus Christ, I shouldn't even have to say that. But don't. But whatever your thoughts are, if you can keep them polite, drop them down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. And even if you can't help me out that way, you know the YouTube stuff. Like, share, subscribe. They all help. But what I want you to remember is that you are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lotfulla, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Alistair McPherson, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Pal Barabajagal, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you'd like me to... I read the names fine, then screwed it up. If you would like to hear me try and say your name while these guys chitter in my ears, check out the rewards on my Patreon. Yeah, you're not distracting at all.